piece of brain dedicated to language. But the really embarrassing part is we can't find it. The evidence is that it's there somewhere, but yeah, they're still looking. They were not going to give up. You see, the average woman talks between, maybe 8,000 and 16,000 words a day. We know this. And the average bloke, well, he talks between 2,000 and 4,000 words a day. And this can have horrendous consequences when we are silly enough to take one adult he and one adult she, put them together in a house and put a little picket fence around the outside and say, live happily ever after. Because really, this is a steep, steep thing to ask. Now, if I had 5 hours of your time, I'd go into all sorts of demonstrations of the implications of this. Sorry, today you get the short-changed version. So we're not going there. What I do want to do is migrate a little to this side and give you the picture that I want you to take home. This, to me, is the basis of one of the easiest ways to understand what is going on. Well, let's just go back here for a moment. I want to show you how these two things work. So this is pictorial and this is linguistic. I'm going to say a word and you watch how quickly it happens. The word is something that you know. The word's going to go in your ear to your left brain, your language brain, and it'll go, yes, I understand this concept. It will whip the concept across your corpus callosum into your pictorial brain and go, yes, I understand this one too. It looks like this. And very quickly, your two brains will work together. Now, you just watch how quick it is. The word is tennis racket. Wasn't that quick? And watch what happens again. Eiffel Tower. See how quickly all that happens and you get a picture in your brain. And I could work it backwards by putting a vision through your eyes into this one, sending it over there, and it would look something like this. And you probably already got a word, because I'm a slow drawer, and I'm not going to ask you what it is. But that's the way the two brains work together. By the by, stick up your hand, please. Anybody who did not get a picture of a tennis racket in your head when I asked you. You didn't. There's two. There's three. Okie dokie. Well, I've presented about 270 seminars around this topic in New Zealand, and I've met 8 people in all that time who could not get a picture when I said tennis racket. Now, the point here is that we think what happens in our brain is normal, but it may not. Some people think differently from others, and that's why I draw this. Here we have our right brain, and it is the pictorial capacity. And here we have our left brain, and it is the linguistic capacity. And what I'm suggesting to you is that each of you sits somewhere on this continuum. If you're Mr. and Mrs. Joe Average, you might have the same amount of pictorial ability as you do linguistic ability. The people who put up their hand and said, no, I didn't get a picture of a tennis racket, in fact, I didn't get a picture at all, they are likely to be people whose positioning on this continuum is way over on this side where they are predominantly linguistic processes with a very little bit of pictorial. Now remember, women tend to have 8 subsections of their left brain that are capable of handling language. Men only have 1. The way the male thinks, now this isn't news to you, I understand that. The way the male thinks is totally different from the way the female thinks. And the male is more like a television screen where we are wired for picture. The language is just a little subset at the bottom. The female tends to be more wired for language, not so much the hands-on person. Now, I am generalizing, I'm stereotyping, and you're going to forgive me, but I'm trying to get a point across here. The person who is wired at this end is a person who thinks primarily in pictures and only has a certain amount of language. Now, I am dyslexic, and I am wired round about there. I am predominantly a hands-on pictorial person. I'm a mechanic, I run a farm, I have my own bulldozer, I cut my own roads. I am a hands-on person, and over Christmas I built a couple of cottages. I have a little bit of language. but I have polished this little bit of language hugely over the last 40 years so that I could stand here today and talk with you with a little bit of ease. I'm actually a very, very shy person. So yes, I do have a little bit of language, highly polished. Now to me, a person who sits in that end of this continuum is the person who is potentially dyslexic. That's not where we're going today, but that is just the background, because our schooling system is language-based. What I want to do is talk about what happens in the way the person here thinks. Because, you see, I think we have a little bit of a difficulty. 15%? 85%. Interesting. Cars on the road. About 85% of them are petrol. About 15% of the vehicles on the road are diesel. What if it was the case that we as parents, caregivers, school teachers were using petrol when we fuel up, when we communicate with our little boys who have their brain style in that area, and we put petrol in their diesel tanks? You see, we don't blame the car when we put petrol in the diesel tank, but we do blame the child when we use language that is petrol style and into their diesel tanks. We blame them by having labels such as oppositional defiance disorder. You know what that one is? I can't remember at the moment because it's just disappeared out of my head. But the other one that's just come through is auditory processing difficulty. You see, every time we use a label with these kids, we're actually blaming the kids. And I just have to tell you, there is absolutely nothing wrong with my little diesel motor. It's not very big, but there's nothing wrong with it. It does not need recalibrating, it does not need rewiring, it doesn't need adjusting, and it certainly does not need chemicals put in it. I am perfectly okay, thank you, as long as you put diesel in my tank. Okay, the implications of this in terms of caregivers. I want to tell you a wee story about my personal history. Don't tell my mother. When I was a 4-year-old kid, living with my mother, my older sisters were at school, a really wild, windy day. I remember my mum saying, "Hey, Laughton, don't use the front door." Now, this is a pretty standard thing for a mum to say to a kid. But just hold for a moment. Remember I asked you, think of a tennis racket, and I got the impression that most of you managed to get a picture of a tennis racket. Well, here's a twist on it. Don't think of a stepladder. So what happens? Well, we'll try it again. Don't think of a kangaroo. What happens inside your head? You get a picture of a kangaroo. Aye, well, don't think of a camel. You see, you're perfectly normal. As soon as I use the word, you get a picture of it, and you know how that works now. It goes from there, across there, to there, you get the picture. Even though I do say don't. So my mother says to me, "Laughton, don't use the front door." What is the picture she has just planted so effectively in my 4-year-old brain? My 4-year-old diesel brain, what's more. She does not know that she has just put a picture in there. Now, this is the basis of sports psychology. It doesn't work with the All Blacks. This is the basis of positive affirmations. And this is the basis of hypnosis. We put pictures in a person's head and they act on them. When we use language that starts with the word don't, we must understand that although the people, the kids, who belong at this end of my continuum hear the words and get the picture, they have a predominance in terms of sufficient linguistic ability to comply with the instruction. However, the kids at this end, they hear the words and they get the picture, but they comply with the picture in their head. My mother says, don't use the front door. 2 minutes later, I find myself out in the wind and the wet on the front deck thinking, what am I doing out here? I'm not the sharpest tack in the carpet, but my toys are inside where it's warm. So I'm heading back inside, but I am too slow because the wind gets to the door before me, and the door slams, and the glass travels up the hallway, and I get a paddled bottom.